Now we are ready to begin BSP blocking in our environment. We are going to use BSP brushes and white box, the overall space of the environment. Using BSP brushes helps to iterate and block in something very quick before you begin to detail or add any static meshes. I always use BSP brushes in the very beginning to prototype and define the space of the environment. And then once I'm happy with the layout, then I begin to replace all the BSP brushes with static meshes. So we have our corridor BSP map open. And the very first thing we need to do is to set up character scale and world architecture dimension. This is a very important step that we need to do in the very beginning to make sure that we build our environment to correct proportion. Now our static meshes are already sized to correct proportion, but sometimes you will not have static meshes ahead of time and you will have to set up the correct dimension of the project yourself. Now the scale of the character will vary depending on the game that you're designing for. In our case, we're going to use the default scale of Unreal Engine character, which is 180 units high. And for this, we're going to use a BSP box. Now let's go ahead, come over to BSP and enable box, and we need a ground plane. Now our template map gives us a static mesh ground plane, but if you are creating a blank map and you don't have a ground plane, just insert one into your level. So let's go ahead, left click and drag box right into our map, and we need to resize the brush settings. The XYZ to the width and the length of the box is going to be 60 by 60, and the height is going to be 180. And let's make sure that this box is positioned on 4. This is the correct default Unreal Engine character height. So now when we create our geometry and we white box using BSP brushes, we want to reference the environment to the character. We can also use a skeletal mesh reference. So instead of using the box, Unreal Engine does provide you with a skeletal mesh. So to enable this, let's go to View Options, Show Engine Content. Make sure you select Engine Content in the content browser. Select this folder. Let's filter by skeletal mesh. And here, tutorial TPP. Left click and drag right in here. It's slightly bigger than 180 units. So we just need to come over to front view or side view. Come to the detail panel. Make sure that the skeletal mesh is selected and scale this down to 0.94. Now let's go ahead, clear our filters and remove show engine content. Alright, now we have our skeletal mesh reference inside the level and we are ready to begin BSP blocking. We're going to start with a ground floor. I have my sketch, my top-down layout, so I can always check and reference back to it. Now this is a very small environment, so you may not need a top-down layout, but I always like to create one because it gets me thinking of the space and the environment that I'm trying to construct. So it's a good habit to always have a top-down layout created, even if it's a very small environment. Now let's go ahead and start with a ground plane. Let me move this so it doesn't intersect. I'm going to select this static mesh ground plane that we have by default, and I'm going to delete it and remove it. Let's drag a box. Let's go to side view, and I'm going to press Shift 5 to go in geometry editing mode and just resize this to create a new BSP ground plane. And let's go ahead and give a little bit of width. Now this is going to be our hallway floor. Now the width and the size of this will change once we begin to replace the BSP brushes with static meshes. But I just want to get an idea a basic layout going first. So I'm not worried about the actual size and how the static meshes are going to line up. All I'm focused on is the layout and the overall space of the environment. Now we can always measure how tall this is or the width of this BSP floor. So we can go into one of the orthographic viewports. So let's go to top. Middle mouse click and drag to measure across and see how wide our floor actually is. Let's go back to perspective. So I like this width, and now let's begin to build up our walls and create the interior of the space. I went ahead and sped up this process, and just now I saved a new version of the map, the Corridor 02 BSP. And instead of dragging a new BSP brush and resizing it, I'm using the ground floor, and I am duplicating the ground floor, resizing using geometry mode, and using that for walls. So this is a quicker workflow. Instead of redragging the brush and resizing it, I'm using geometry mode of already existing brushes. And I also scaled the wall 300 units high. That is a good dimension for height of the walls, but I end up changing it to 400 later. Here I dragged another brush and I changed the brush type to subtractive, and I resized and rescaled to have a cutout of the window. I decided that instead of having a long BSP brush, I resized that BSP brush to mimic the size of a static mesh of a single wall that's going to be similar to the dimensions of a future static mesh that's going to go into that place. Sometimes I don't do this. Sometimes I just use long brushes and I just work with subtracting and adding. But when I know that an environment is going to be constructed using modular pieces, just as this environment will be, it sometimes helps to judge space of the environment by using modular brushes in the fashion that I'm doing now. So this is just another way that you can block in BSP brushes, using multiple brushes that mimic modular static meshes. And now I'm taking the additive wall and the subtractive windows and duplicate them along the hallway. And now I feel that the length of the hallway is good enough, and I begin to close off the corners by introducing another hallway, kind of a connecting corridor to the main hallway that we see here. Also, I want to mention something very important. When you blocking in BSP brushes to get a sense of the environment, of the space and the layout, the length of this hallway is not the final one. I am simply guesstimating of how I want this hallway, this corridor to look. But once the static meshes are introduced, the hallway length and the width as well as the height may change. So this is a very iterative and flexible process, and it may not end up exactly the same way as we have BSP brushes blocked in. I am also constantly jumping back into the main hallway and seeing how the character reference scale that we inserted compares to the environment. So it's very important that you constantly monitor the dimensions and the proportion of your environment to the character reference scale. Now let's go ahead and expand into side corridors. I inserted a BSP stairs brush, and I used the details panel of the stairs to get the right stair height and length. There is a certain length and height of each step that looks good, and that is step height is 15 units and step length is 30 units. Now of course this will vary depending on the type of environment you're creating, but those values seem to look the best. Then once I'm happy with the set of the size of these stairs, I duplicate it to the other side. And then I notice that the hallway where the stairs are going to go on the further side, on the north side, is too large. So I just needed to resize the brushes down. These stairs are also going to come up halfway, and then I wanted to have a small landing, and then they're going to continue to the second floor. So it adds a little bit more interesting geometry to the environment instead of having the stairs strictly go to the second floor. You may think, why are we using BSP brushes to blacken the layout first, if we are eventually going to replace all of the BSP brushes with static meshes? And since we have our static meshes already available, we can just skip the step and go straight into using static meshes. The BSP blocking process is very important. It allows you to prototype your level and focus on layout, scale, proportion, gameplay, and the overall playable space. You can quickly update brushes to try out a new idea, a new route, or a new layout. If you were to jump in and start using static meshes right away, then it would be very difficult to update the layout. Static meshes are used to make the level look good, to detail, and to define what this level actually is, the visual theme. And it would be too early in the process to begin using static meshes. And for that, we need to use BSP brushes and focus on the foundation, the core of the environment, which is the space, getting the correct scale, and prototyping gameplay. Also, with BSP brushes, we can quickly update the layout. If we don't like a certain length or width of a hallway, we can quickly change that and update very easily. And it would just take too much time to do that with static meshes. And then, after you've blocked in your level with BSP brushes, and you are happy with the scale, the proportion, the layout, and the overall space of your level, and if it's a playable map and you have implemented and tested gameplay, then you would begin to make your environment look good by replacing the BSP brushes with static meshes. I have now blocked in the 2 hallways and the 2 stairs that going to lead up to the second floor. We won't have anything on the second floor. It only serves a purpose of making the environment seem larger than it actually is. Our focal point is going to be in the main hallway, and these side hallways with the stairs just add an additional dimension that the environment continues, but we'll block that off at the top to create that illusion. We have pretty much blocked in the main layout, and I'm resizing a few brushes to close up some gaps. Now what I decided to do to speed up the workflow is to take the hallway that's on the bottom and duplicate it to the other side. Another thing I want to mention about the BSP blocking process is I am using simple geometric shapes to block in this level. Unreal Engine offers a variety of brushes that you can use, cone, sphere, but I am only using simple boxes and simple stairs. All I care about is the layout and to define the space of this map. So I mainly stick to cube, straight stairs, cylinders, and spiral staircases. I also don't use a lot of subtractive brushes. Most of these brushes are additive, and the subtractive brushes are only used to carve out windows, doorways, and certain shapes from the additive brushes. This allows for faster workflow and quicker iterations. Now I'm putting some final touches by duplicating the subtractive windows from the main hallway and moving them into the second floor. So I've added 4 windows onto one wall in one hallway, and then I'm duplicating the subtractive brush again and placing that brush to add 2 additional windows for the other hallway on the opposite wall. At this point we can call it done with the BSP blocking. We have our main layout. The space, proportion, and scale seem correct. I like the layout. There's enough interesting visual elements within this environment. We have stairs to extend into the second floor to add additional depth to the map. We have some columns for possible ideas to break up the wall. These aren't very important, but they allow you to have a little bit more visual ideas of what you want to do with your environment. So this is a good foundation to build upon when we begin inserting our static meshes. So this isn't the final layout. It will change a little bit due to static meshes and how they fit together. There is one more thing that we want to do, and that is playtest our map inside the level. Now we chose a blank template, so we're not going to have a player character that's walking around. But if you are creating this for a game, and you're going to have a playable map. You want to spend a considerable amount of time playtesting your level mechanics. But since we're just constructing this environment, you still want to jump inside the map and test it from the player's point of view. So let's go ahead, right click into the level and choose play from here. Now we don't have a character, so we are freely flying around, but we can still get a sense of space, proportion, and the layout. So now we are done with the BSP blocking process, and in the next video we're going to focus on inserting, working, and constructing our environment using static meshes.